The Democrats only got one shot to get this right. If they screw this up, the Maine Senate seat's gone. From the Legomicus Studios, Legomicus elections. So I had a feeling a couple days ago we were going to be doing this video at some point. Just really weren't sure when we were going to be doing this video, but the news that I think a lot of us were anticipating coming out of the great state of Maine, vacation land as you may know it, has happened, and that is that Graham Platner, the Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate running against Susan Collins up in Maine, has dropped out. So we were kind of building up to this. It was, I think, at the end of the day, a pretty turbulent campaign, and we'll talk about a few of the things that happened over the course of the campaign without digging too deeply into any specific allegations or anything like that. And also we want to talk at some point tonight about where Democrats in Maine are going to go from here. But there's no question it ended up being a pretty turbulent campaign for Platner. Because when you think about some of the allegations and the controversies that have bubbled over the course of this campaign, we're not just talking about things that happened in the last few weeks or the things that happened since the primary, which was less than a month ago, if you can believe that. We are talking about things that started coming up last October. So there have just been a number of things that have come out in the media. And I guess what just happens is you get to a critical mass of controversies and allegations, and then eventually your campaign just can't sustain it anymore. So a lot of things were alleged, and those allegations, which of course, again, just pointing this out, just so everyone's on the same page, they are just allegations at this point. And if anything comes of them, that will be litigated by the appropriate people. It is not our job to do that here. It is our job to talk about the electoral political reality. That's what we do here. So the allegations have been around for a while. The most recent one came out a few days ago, was damaging enough that endorsements started disappearing almost right away. For example, Ruben Gallego, the Arizona senator. I know that was one of the endorsements that disappeared almost immediately after that last story dropped. There were a number of others. There were unions also that pulled their support. So you had also some national Democratic figures that were calling on him to step aside. So it really just snowballed over the last 48 hours. And some people might be saying, well, there were all these other controversies, and we knew about a lot of them when the primary happened, but he still won his primary. So yeah, he did win his primary. So let's back up a little bit. Platner won his primary. As we said, he won it pretty handily, I would say. I believe in a prior piece that we did, we said that at the end of the day, there were a number of Maine Democrats that felt like he was their guy, even in spite of the allegations and the controversies that were coming out. So you also had a guy who was running against the governor of the state, Janet Mills. And Mills got into the race much later. Mills, and this is just my opinion, I don't know Janet Mills. I'm sure she is a lovely woman. But it seemed like from the campaign, she got in late. She hardly campaigned. It seemed like it was just not something she wanted to do. Maybe the Democratic Senatorial Committee, maybe some of the higher-ups in the Senate and the National Party, maybe they put her up to it. But Mills is riding off to a pretty well-earned retirement right now. She's been governor of the state for 2 terms. She has served in public office in Maine for a while, and she will be riding off into the sunset pretty soon. So, it just seemed like she wasn't all the way in, whereas Platner was all the way in from the beginning. And he built a lot of momentum, especially with progressive voters in Maine, and kind of built a movement. And apparently there was a third guy running in the Democratic primary. Exactly. I couldn't even tell you what the person's name was, except for the fact that I remember looking at the election results and there were 3 names on there. And I'm like, oh, someone was running against them. Okay. Well, clearly that person didn't get any traction either. So it really just seemed like Platner was always going to win that primary, because if you're running against a candidate that's arguably not even trying, and then somebody that nobody's ever heard of, then yeah, you're going to probably end up winning the primary, especially when you've got the feelings of a movement behind you. And in that movement, I think we've seen in Maine as elsewhere that there is a mood for change in America. There is a mood to swap out certain career politicians. We saw in New York a couple of weeks ago, a few Democratic incumbents lost their primaries for Congress. We saw in Colorado recently a longtime incumbent in Denver, who herself is a progressive, lost to an even more progressive younger challenger. And we've been seeing this where you're getting a lot of incumbents. And we've had senators that have lost their primaries, and that's on the Republican side. So there is definitely somewhat of a mood for change. And I think to a lot of people, even with the allegations and the controversies that were there, I think to some Maine voters, he represented change. I've said it before. I will say it again. Maine is going to do whatever the hell Maine wants to do. Maine is one of, if not the most politically independent state in the entire country. It is not just a strict blue state or whatever. They're going to elect whoever the hell they feel like electing. So you had him win his primary and was backed up by the winds of change. And at the time that he won his primary, a lot of this stuff was known, and he won anyway. So when he dropped out, he gave his video announcement. And I will mention this too, he has maintained that these allegations, specifically the ones I believe that just came out, he has maintained that they are false. But he also said a lot of stuff about being driven out of the race. The deadline to get him to withdraw from the race is next week. It's on the 13th. And then Maine Democrats have a couple weeks after that to formally replace him on the ballot. So where do Maine Democrats go from here? So Platner is exiting this Senate race. They have until July 27th to get a new nominee on the ballot. Now, how are Democrats going to pick that person? They are going to have a nominating convention. So the thinking was, because over the last 48 hours before he dropped out, it was pretty clear that this was snowballing. This was going to happen. So the question was, well, how are Maine Democrats going to pick the new nominee? Are they just going to all get together in a back room and pick somebody? Well, they decided that they're going to have a nominating convention. I believe there's going to be, I want to say 600 delegates at it. So 100 from the state committee and then 500 delegates selected from around the state. And I don't know when this convention is going to be yet. I think you're going to hear something about that very shortly. Obviously, it's going to be very soon because they only have about 2.5 weeks to get a new candidate on the ballot. So it's coming. Don't know when yet. Stay tuned. But there will be a nominating convention to replace him. So look, Right now, I have heard and I've seen a lot of progressives are worried that they're going to lose their progressive candidate in Maine, that they're going to end up with an establishment Democrat. Well, one thing I can tell you that I am very confident in, it will not be Janet Mills. For one thing, if you look at some of the polling that's come out, like there was a poll that just came out testing other candidates against Susan Collins. Janet Mills actually did the worst of them. And when she did run for Senate, she didn't really seem all that interested. The Democrats, if they were going to do something monumentally stupid, it would be making the nominee Janet Mills. That would be just incomprehensibly stupid. There was no appetite among Maine Democrats to pick her. None whatsoever. So I think you would have a party that would be very, very underwhelmed with her as the nominee. So who is already signaling that they're interested? Troy Jackson, former president of the Maine State Senate. Believe he was from a district in northern Maine. Former Republican who had some socially conservative views, eventually became more of a progressive, had a famous run-in with Paul LePage during the days when LePage was governor of Maine, and ran as a progressive for Maine governor, lost the primary to Hannah Pingree, who will probably be the next governor of Maine. At least at this point, I would think so. And if you're looking for a progressive in Maine, and I'm sure Democrats there are, then he is definitely a possibility. You also have Dan Kleben, who is the owner of the Maine Beer Company. He was running before he got out of the race, and now he is back in. So that's the list for now. Jared Golden, a name I had heard. He's the congressman from the 2nd District, pretty moderate. I believe he already announced that he's not going to be a contender for that. And again, if you wanted to annoy progressives in the Maine Democratic Party, picking Golden would be a very good way to do that. So not going to be Mills, not going to be Golden. I couldn't tell you at this point who I think it's going to be. It might be Jackson. It might be somebody like Shenna Bellows, another person who ran for office in this cycle in the primary. Not for Senate, for governor. There may be other names that come about, but we're going to find out in the next couple weeks because it's got to be somebody. And Democrats, let's be clear here. The Democrats only got one shot to get this right. If they screw this up, the Maine Senate seat's gone. And I will say this too, because I have heard some reporting, I've seen some opinion, saying this is a blow to the Democrats' chances of taking back the majority. I think some would argue that getting somebody else in there with less baggage probably improves their chances of taking the majority. But, your mileage may vary. People can disagree about that. I really don't think that this seat is lost to the Democrats yet. I do not. I think it's still early enough in the election cycle. It's only July 8th, 9th, whenever you watch this video. Let's say July 9th. The general election's not for another 4 months. And some people comparing it to Biden dropping out and then Kamala Harris taking over. Running a Senate race in Maine is a far different animal from taking over a presidential campaign a few months before the election. They're very, very different. You might be able to pull off a switcheroo in Maine. Hey, and sometimes the switcheroos worked in the past. Do you remember the Senate race in New Jersey back in 2002? The Senator Bob Torricelli, he was going down in flames. So they swapped him out for Frank Lautenberg. And Lautenberg won. So, hey, you know what? Maybe the switcheroo will work. I don't think this seat is lost to the Democrats yet. A lot depends on what happens over the next few weeks. Are the Democrats going to find a candidate that everybody, for the most part, can be happy with? Are they going to find a candidate that the balance of Maine voters could be happy with? Who they end up picking at this nominating convention is going to really, really inform what happens in the rest of this campaign and whether or not they actually have a shot at still winning this race. We had it as a toss-up before. We still have it as a toss-up now. I really could not conceivably move this race off of a toss-up at this point until we know who is going to be the new nominee in a couple weeks. We will reassess probably once we get into August. But for now, where it is where it's staying. But I think we all recognize Susan Collins is going to be tough to beat regardless. Maine has kind of moved away from where she is politically, but she keeps winning. Democrats thought they had her dead to rights in 2020 with Sarah Gideon. The opinion polls said that they did until they didn't, and Susan Collins actually ended up winning fairly comfortably, as I recall. So Democrats have thought they had her beat before, and I think a lot of Democrats are going to be cautious about making predictions about winning this race, given that they were pretty sure they were going to win it in 2020 and they did not. Now, granted, 2026 may be a more blue midterm environment than the presidential election year of 2020. Could be. It could be a more Democratic electorate. Could be. But Susan Collins is definitely going to be hard to beat. There was a lot of baggage that Platner had accumulated over the course of his campaign in less than a year. And I think a lot of Democrats were worried that it was going to hurt their chances. So he moved out of the race. And now we're going to see a new candidate in here. And TBD on whether or not that candidate has a shot against Susan Collins in Maine. And for more on the Maine Senate race, Legomicus elections, like and subscribe, follow us on social media. We'll see you soon.